Good morning, good afternoon, if any of those of you connected are connected from the other side of the Atlantic. My name is Niels Hol Nielsen. I'm the practice manager of IDURM, which is a global unit at the World Bank here, focusing on disaster and climate resilience. We also manage a trust fund that's called the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. Thank you all for joining this brown bag without brown bags. This meeting lunch. Presentation. No lunch offered.
No breakfast either.
We will be focusing on, or we're calling this event Advancing Universal Accessibility Through Regulatory Reforms. GFDRR, the trust fund, manages donor partnerships within the World Bank to drive resilience as a foundation for sustainable development. We seek to help countries understand, manage, and reduce climate and disaster risk, and we do this by developing know-how on new technologies, regulatory frameworks, and other innovations, contributing practical ideas to help shape and model policies and enable people to thrive and economies to grow. We support and learn from teams in the regions. I hope, well, there's a few here in the room, and I hope maybe a few connected. And we seek to drive impact at scale by translating and transferring the knowledge that these teams create, sometimes on their own, sometimes with us and with our support. And one of the key areas we focus on to reduce disaster risk is, of course, the built environment. And our building regulation and resilience team that are here today, they contribute to this objective aiming at enhancing regulatory systems for a better built environment, especially buildings. The built environment, the team has generated a bunch of data on why it matters. Accessibility in the built environment is important for everyone. There's more than 1.3 billion people in the world, which is currently about 16% of the population that live with some form of disability. And this number is growing due to aging populations. By 2030, 1 in 6 people globally will be over 60 years old. And by 2070, 60% of the world's population will reside in urban areas, therefore making the need for accessible buildings more urgent than ever before. The universal accessibility in the built environment is not just a matter of compliance and good practice, it becomes increasingly an economic imperative, evidenced by these numbers. So having said that, accessibility gaps unfortunately remain widespread. 43% of general buildings and 42% of public drinking water facilities in developing countries are not wheelchair accessible. 15% of hospitals lack basic accessibility features, according to UN estimates. These barriers have real economic costs. Persons with disabilities are about 4 times less likely to find a job, and economic losses related to disability are large, ranging between 3 to 7% of GDP, according to international labor organizations. On the other hand, companies investing in disability inclusion report up to 28% higher revenue and double net income, found according to Accenture. There is an opportunity in regulatory work because integrating accessibility from the start is cost effective, often adding less than 1% to construction cost, according to the National Network for Americans with Disabilities Act. Today's event will present key findings from a report that GFDRR has funded, Global Assessment of Building Codes, showcase country experiences applying practical tools to the building code checklist for universal accessibility, and discuss the cost benefit of universal design features. We will have a panel of experts that will interact with participants to discuss practical entry points for World Bank Group operations to further advance universal accessibility in the built environments, with focus on how accessible buildings unlock job opportunities and foster inclusive growth. And I'll now pass the floor to Anna, our lead disaster risk management specialist, to moderate the session. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Niels, for your insightful opening remarks and also for bringing and framing the importance of universal accessibility on the built environment. We have a very exciting agenda today where, as Niels mentioned, we're going to present one of the most recent reports from GFDRR in universal accessibility. We have one guest speaker that is going to talk about the cost benefit of universal designs, and we will have a panel discussion. We expect that this is a very engaging meeting and that all of you contribute to the chat. We will have a Q&A session where we expect everyone to be able to engage and participate. We expect that not only you get with a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities of universal accessibility, but also with actionable ideas that can inform the work that you are doing across the World Bank. So with this, I will pass the floor now to Keiko Sakoda and Andres Balcazar, who is going to present the advances on universal accessibility through regulatory reforms. Most of you probably know Keiko, so I don't know if she needs an introduction. She is our team lead for building regulations for resilience in GFDRR and have been engaged in this topic for a long time. She holds a master in architectural engineering and engineering from Kyoto University. And we have Andres Balcazar, that is our consultant. So he's not completely external to the World Bank. He has been supporting the building regulations team in this process of developing the guidance note that we are sharing today. He's an architect with experience on accessibility and human rights. He has been advising countries like Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, the United Arab Emirates in the development of the accessibility code, and also in the implementation of several countries of this type of regulations. And he's a member of the Global Leadership Council of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So with this, I will pass the floor to you guys to share some of the insights of the report.
Thank you so much, Niels and Anna. So I first would like to start off, from sharing some findings of our global report. But just before that, because I see many people are joining outside of GPERL, so I would like to share how we, work with the government. So as part of the GFDRR, global unit, Niels managed. So we have 16 thematic area, and then we are one of the thematic area that we provide support to the task teams. And the topic is building regulation. So any country's teams who are trying to update or help update or develop the new building codes or building regulations, we provide support, technical support. And the focus has been resilience angle, green building, and also more increasingly universal accessibility or inclusive built environment. We provide regulatory assessment support and finding the gaps and recommendation. We also assess the building control process, how building approval process works, and then what kind of optimization opportunity exists and what kind of digitization opportunity exists. We also provide capacity building training program, and we also produce global and regional knowledge. So one of the topics that we're going to talk about is from this global report that I just mentioned. But one of the highly demanded services from our team is this assessment of the existing building codes and regulations. So we have mainly two different tools. One is called building code checklist. That is basically looking into the contents of the building code. What is the topic covered and how, what is the kind of depth of provisions included in the code. So we have 4 different modules of the checklist. One is structural resilience, fire safety, green building, and universal accessibility. We usually apply four modules in one go, and then identify recommendation, and we summarize the findings in presentation format, and we provide to the government. And then government will be the one who decide, okay, which recommendation to take in the ongoing process of the update or development of the code. But of course, it is more cost effective if all the topics are addressed in one go. But the tendency we see is, government prioritize safety and structural element first. Of course, because it is critical element, but we also encourage clients to also take up, universal accessibility and green building aspect as well, because these are aspect which is also lagging behind. Another checklist or another assessment tools that we have is building the graduate capacity assessment. This is looking more beyond the single building code. It is looking into more like implementation angle of the building regulation, whole spectrum of legislative and regulatory framework, also licensing and insurance perspective, and also urbanization trend. So basically, this help to improve to inform investment opportunities in related area. So we use these two different tools to help country task teams to design or implement the lending operation. And Andres is going to talk about the universal accessibility checklist, but just before, I'm going to share some findings from the global assessment. So this year, we published this global assessment of building codes, and then main focus was resilience angle, but we also did a little bit of study about universal accessibility. We covered 22 countries from 6 regions, and main things that we found was the topic covered under the universal accessibility was contained around the mobility challenge, not beyond that. So many countries didn't address anything about cognitive challenge or visual hearing impairment or temporary disability like pregnant women or children, elderly population. Those kind of needs specific to different population were not well addressed. And these are something that we should, advocate more to the government to address better. And also, another fundamental challenge is accessibility to those regulation documents. 64% of countries had, free and accessible environment for those documents, but not necessarily the remaining 40% or 35%. So this is also the area where we are advocating for government to make the information available to those people who are willing to utilize those information. And as I mentioned, the topic covered in the universal accessibility or user needs covered under the universal accessibility requirement is quite limited to only the mobility challenge. Of course, the provisions related to mobility challenge is also not yet 100% complete, but the main, more bigger challenge is regulation are not recognizing the wider spectrum of the user needs, which should be captured in the same universal accessibility provisions. And lastly, I just want to highlight one thing from this slide is the many universal accessibility provisions are voluntary, not mandatory. So this is also something that we encourage the government to consider. Of course, it's too ideal maybe to think about, the government make all the universal accessibility provision mandatory because of the cost issue, etc. But, we'll hear more from LK later. What is the real cost of, the universal accessibility design? Because we have a kind of mentality that, if you integrate this universal accessibility provision, it will be much costly. But the data is showing it's not that expensive. And also, if you do integrate those designs from the beginning of the new design process, it'll be much cost effective. So we talk about that, but basically we using those and then also prioritizing some accessibility provisions, we can also encourage government to make some critical provisions more mandatory and then make the buildings more accessible to people require accessibility features. So from here, I'm just handing over to Andres. We're going to talk about the checklist.
Thank you, Keiko. Thank you for having me here for the invitation. We already heard some figures about disability. Disability is a global phenomenon. No country is really free of having a population with disability. It's part of a human condition. That's why also it's important that we all really consider this as a very priority topic. It's not only the population, most of the population lives in cities, but also the population with disabilities is increasing. Aging also is a global issue. Perhaps now many countries are entering that phase of aging society in many parts of the world. And also children and caregivers. And while caregivers, we can understand also families, especially women in many medium to low income countries. Women are in charge of taking care of their relatives with disability, and also it's a very big burden that is more stress because of the lack of accessibility in many different fields. So this is, as I say, something global, and we should really pay attention. That's why we are developing this checklist. Okay. Okay, yes. What is the objective? Two main objectives for the checklist. One is to assess the existing codes and understand the gaps to enhance the current accessibility provision, but also it could serve as a reference model for new codes. This is also varying in every region. In the global study presented before, we saw some tendencies in the 22 countries, but also outside of that global report, there are different ways in which accessibility is being implemented. Also, the target, as we already said, diverse needs, persons with disabilities. Also, now we understand that benefits of accessibility are not only for persons with disability, but also for the senior population, children, and other beneficiaries of what is called universal accessibility. Who are the users of the checklist? The main target are architects or even engineers in some cases, ideally with some expertise, experience on accessibility, but also we can help with that part if there are no such professionals in any country. How to use the checklist. Here is the process of how to use it. I just want to stress 2 points here. One is to identify universal accessibility regulations and chapters, because sometimes we may think that they are in the building codes, but in reality, in each country is different. Some of them are included in the building code, some are outside, some guidelines, a specific chapter, or distributed among different regulations, fire and safety, sometimes even some social security law, something like that, or labor inclusion laws. And also it's important to assess the interface with these other regulations, because sometimes some part of the regulation is mandatory and accessibility is not, and sometimes could be in the fire and safety, and that part is mandatory, but other aspects are not. So that's important to understand to better help implementation. Yes. This is the key component of universal accessibility provisions. We have 6 categories. This is the basic accessibility provision, even more than basic accessibility provision.
I agree.
Okay.
I think somebody who is speaking might be able to mute.
Okay, so we have these 6 categories, and I want to highlight that it's like a logical journey. We start with the external environment of a building and facility, and then we go in through the entrances, doors, horizontal, vertical circulations, then the building facilities itself, I mean, what we are going to use inside a building. And some accessibility provisions just stay until there. As Keiko mentioned, is mostly aimed at the physical disability, but the 2 last ones are very, very important, because we are also adding wayfinding, signage, which is important for neurodiversity, lighting as well, acoustics, audible, hearing enhancement. All that is where we can really cover the needs of diverse group of persons with disabilities, senior population, children, and all the beneficiaries. And evacuation and safe egress also very important. Not many accessibility guidelines include evacuation and safe egress. That should be also considered.
And these topics were distilled based on the code comparative analysis in more than 10 countries.
More than 10
Yeah,
countries,
and then we
exactly.
distilled the commonly addressed topic.
Exactly. from a global perspective. This is an example of the questions that you may find. We have a description, a topic, a description, and also, let's say, the functional requirements. We didn't put any specific measurements. That's also very important to note that each country, they try to follow some model standard, but sometimes it is important to consider the local culture, traditions, economy, I mean, many things. So this is only to highlight what we are aiming at looking for in this assessment. It could be presented in different ways, different measurements. The important thing is that it's considered all the different topics. It's a very extensive checklist, even though we try to make it short. Yeah, it's okay. So implementation policies and incentives, we have examples from 21 countries that goes from finance, compliance, recognition. Recognition is very important. It's having an impact in many big companies worldwide. They want to be recognized, are inclusive, open to diversity. And I will show you a couple of examples in the following slides. Yeah, two country examples, Tanzania and Rwanda, doing this exercise of the global what is the name? Global report. Yeah, we found that Tanzania just wanted to copy and paste, just want to use the code from another country, which is okay. It's a good code. It's a very comprehensive model standard, very easy to understand, and it's like it was like a natural that they just wanted to use it. But it's important to understand that it's critical to customize for, as I said, local culture, build environment, economy. There are different topics that affect how we understand and implement accessibility, and that's important. And not just try to use one from another country, which could be easier and economic, but in the long run, it will prove the contrary. Also, Rwanda, the example here is that they had a limited number of accessibility provisions. As I said, usually it's only covering the needs of wheelchair users, but that's the basic. Now, even the market, even the companies are asking for more, not only the community with disability, but also there are some other stakeholders and are realizing that this is more complex and goes beyond just basic ramps and wide doors. So also there was a disconnect between the building code and their own relevant standards. Both they had a limited scope of what were the anticipated accessibility users, and there is a need to enhance coordination among the chapters in a code. It's important to consider customized code provisions. The Middle East, Asia, Latin America, we use the buildings, we use the toilets in a different way. That's an example I put, because we use toilets in a different way in Japan, Colombia, or the Netherlands. Really, it's incredible. It's supposed to be the same, but it is not. Now, we need to promote the importance of wide accessibility needs and capturing evolving accessibility needs. Now, here, two examples. They're very quickly. I don't have too much time, but we have an example for Mexico. That street we see there is not a public road. It's not a city. It's a private property. It's a logistics center. It's a group of huge warehouses for rent, and the owner, they want to get a recognition and award, a label in Mexico. They usually, these big companies, they want to get the LEED certificate or some sustainable whatever, and these certificates are including each year. It's increasing the incorporation of accessibility requirements for persons with disabilities. So I put it here because, yeah, I was impressed that there are no pedestrian traffic. It's mostly trucks, lorries, but they put this tactile payment for blind persons throughout their facilities. And as I said, it's a public property. Then to the left, upper right, it's a wellness room. It's the headquarters of a French company in Mexico. They have this for their employees. Someone is stressed during the day, just they don't want to see the boss anymore for 5 minutes. They can go in there and relax a little bit. But even though this is for any employee, now the accessibility new trends are asking for what is called quiet rooms for neurodiversity, autism, people that get overwhelmed by sound, by lights, all the stress of the day, and they can go there 5 minutes and relax. So here, when we did the assessment, the problem here is that it's a very small room. and it needs to be larger because a wheelchair user should be able to enter there. The two below are a bank in Mexico, a big bank. The left is their, it's a high security facility. They have their monitoring center there, the fraud prevention unit, so no one really, only them can enter there. We were there assessing accessibility. They have an inaccessible main entrance, a big flight of steps, like one floor up. So they did a separate entrance here from the street directly to it's through the parking lot and then elevator. And this is an existing building, an old building that was somehow retrofitted. And I just wanted to show that an example that there are different ways to retrofit. Here, they didn't touch the staircase because it was expensive, almost impossible to put there a mechanical device. So they just opened another door, just near the main entrance. Also, that is important to check in the codes. And the last one below right, it's a lactation room. It's the same bank. It's a call center. It's a huge facility. Accessible in many ways. They have like 10 toilets, and all of them are accessible. And here I just want to highlight they are also including a family facility, the lactation room, and it's quite accessible because a wheelchair can enter there. The observation here that was only that it should be easy to move the furniture for allow a wheelchair user or mother wheelchair user. So checklist will help to, it covers more than the basic. For a country that has nothing, the checklist will help them a lot. And also for these more advanced countries that are including more things, it's also important that the checklist will help them to check what they have and also to a guidance for specific type of buildings. It's important. As I am showing here examples of not typical building offices, and also to consider that accessibility provision is mainly aimed at urban environments. If we have a project in a rural place, in a small community, changes should be made. It's impossible to design accessibility standard that cover everything because in the rural areas, another material should be used, etc. So also that's important to consider, and that we should also take into consideration large and complex buildings. Those have different requirements. The main example is an airport. An airport requires a lot of different things that sometimes the local accessibility codes don't cover because it's too much, very specific. That also requires specific attention. That would be my thank you, my presentation.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no, thanks, Andres and Keiko. I think this has been very enlightening to understand the comprehensiveness of this topic, and also probably raised a lot of questions for the teams on the implementation side, and also from the countries on the implementation side. So some countries want to do a progressive approach, but they need to understand the context. So that's where our next speaker comes into place. I would like to welcome Elke Illiams. Sorry, okay, I'm trying to do my best to pronounce your last name. She's an architect, researcher, and guest professor of the Faculty of Architecture and Arts at Hasselt University in Belgium. She holds a PhD in architecture and focus on human-centered design, with a particular interest in universal design, inclusive environments, and subjective well-being. She works closely with societal partners to translate academic insights into tangible real-world applications. So she's going to talk about the cost-benefit of universal accessibility designs and some examples of public buildings. So over to you, again, welcome.
Thank you, Anna. I'll try first to share my presentation with you. Is it visible for you like that?
Yes.
Yes?
Perfectly.
Okay. So thanks, Anna, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be joining you virtually today and to share some insights from the research study we conducted on the cost of universal accessibility in public buildings. This project that I will be talking about today was carried out between 2017 and 2019, and it was commissioned by the Flemish government together with the Flemish Center of Expertise in Accessibility and Universal Design. And we did it in a Flemish province named Limburg, which is next to the Dutch and the German border. Our main goal in this project was to understand the real financial impact of buildings that are truly accessible for everyone, answering the following two research questions, namely, what is the nominal and relative cost of various interventions required to achieve full accessibility, and what is the share of full accessibility in the total construction cost. So we looked at three typologies of public buildings: secondary schools representing a larger scale of public buildings, town halls as medium-sized buildings, and small retail shops representing a small scale typology. We examined 12 cases, so real cases. So these were existing buildings that were already been built. This was a exploratory study, so the goal wasn't to make broad generalizations based on these 12 cases, but rather it allowed us to test these research methods and to identify first insights in cost patterns. When we talk about accessibility, most people immediately think about wheelchair accessibility, but I think Keiko and Andres already showed you it's more than that. We often have the main focus in our national building codes on those wheelchair accessibility, but it's much broader, including, as you said already before, visual, auditory, cognitive limitations, etc. So, and indeed, more than over 16% of the world population live with some form of disability. So this shows how crucial this topic really is. And however, when we design for universal accessibility in mind, it's not only people with disabilities who benefit, but many of us also experience temporary limitations, like when having a broken leg or being pregnant. Also, older adults and children, they may interact differently with their environment. And next to temporary limitations, it's also important that everyone can be limited by an everyday situation. For example, when we carry a suitcase, pushing a stroller, walking on a glass stairs when you are afraid of heights, or wearing a headphone and not being able to hear your environment. All these can change how we experience a space. So this is why it's very important to look beyond disability and design for a diversity of users. In the end, universal accessibility actually benefits everyone. So therefore, we calculated the cost of universal accessibility in this project, and we applied a wide set of 119 criteria based on the Belgian quality label of inclusive building. And these criteria were grouped in 15 building elements. I saw some similar things as in the 6 key components that Andres presented before. So you can see here all the 15 building elements, and those formed the backbone of our detailed cost comparison across all the examined cases. An important thing when talking about the cost of universal accessibility is a question that we have to ask, namely, what exactly counts as a cost of accessibility? I'll try to explain this with a small example. You see here the picture of a door and a double door, a wide double door in a main hall. And we don't know why the door is there, maybe because for aesthetic reasons that the designer placed the door in this rather classical building, or maybe to meet fire safety regulations in this building. But wide doors also happen to be an accessibility feature, as they allow comfortable passage for everyone. So should this cost be then considered fully part of universal accessibility, or maybe partly or not at all. So you can understand this is only one example that shows how difficult it is to assign a specific cost to accessibility. And since every building has its own unique context, as you can see here, different styles, materials, design, logic, it's very difficult to assign a cost. So, and when we look to the existing literature, so the existing research studies, only a few studies have examined the costs related to accessibility, and most of them rely on more theoretical models or fixed prices, often working with hypothetical cases rather than real ones. And this doesn't really reflect the true accessibility cost, taking into account this specific design context. And this is why in this study we have focused on real buildings and real costs, aiming to capture how accessibility truly plays out in practice. So how did we approach this research? First, we evaluated the level of universal accessibility for the 12 cases that we selected. And we call it the as-is situation, as you can see here. Oh, no, that's here the as-is situation. And so we assessed all 119 criteria for those 12 buildings. Next, this gives us a detailed overview for each building with a list of compliant and non-compliant criteria that we wanted to adapt for two specific scenarios, namely the renovation scenario and the new build scenario. So what is it? The renovation scenario, we imagined how could we retrofit the existing situation, the as-is situation, to make it fully accessible. And in the new build scenario, we looked at how this as-is situation could have been designed to fully be inclusive from the very start. So in step 3, we looked for the best possible design solutions for each non-compliant criterion. And in some cases, that solution was very straightforward and simple. And in others, it required actual research by design. So for example, if a corridor was too narrow, we explored how we could widen it in both the renovation and a new build scenario, while still meeting all the other criteria. Then in step 4, we worked with 4 independent contractors who each calculated realistic market prices for all these interventions. And they were asked a specific question that you can read here. Well, is there a cost for this intervention, so for each criterion, compared to the as-is situation? And if there is a cost, what is the additional or the minus cost when retrofitting the existing situation? So this is the scenario, the renovation scenario, or building it immediately new this way. So that's a new build scenario. So in the end, we had a list of additional minus and minus costs compared to the actual building, as is for both the scenarios. And this approach allowed us to estimate actual cost, construction costs. Voilà. So let us then have a look at the results of this study. Here you can see the total cost of universal accessibility as well as for the 3 typologies. The right side shows the nominal costs in euros, and the left side shows the relative cost or the percentage compared to the total construction cost. The yellow bars show the renovation scenario and the green bars the new build scenario. So for all 12 cases together, it would cost us about 833,000 euros to renovate them to a fully accessible level. That is about 2.3% of the total construction cost of the current situation of the building. If we had the same buildings, if we had built them fully accessible from the start, the additional cost would have been 339,000 euros, or 0.9% of the total construction cost. So when we look at the results per typology, we see clear differences where the relative cost of the renovation of the small-scale retail shops have a higher cost than the large-scale secondary schools, who have the lowest relative cost below 2.5%. The same trend appears in the new build scenario, where costs drop across all the three typologies. This figure shows how the total universal accessibility cost is distributed across those 15 building elements that we used for both the renovation and the building and the new build scenarios. And if we take a closer look, the 5 elements on the left, being interior lighting, floor coverings, color contrast, signage, and fixed furniture, had very low additional costs, each under 15,000 euros for the renovation scenario, together making up only 5% of the total accessibility budget. On the other hand, the elevators and the indoor stairs and ramps were the most expensive items, representing 35% of the renovation budget and 50% of the new build budget. So the same pattern appears here. The new build scenario is consistently cheaper than the renovation, but for some elements, we really saw a difference that is very large. For example, the circulation and the exterior stairs and ramp, which were very expensive to fix afterwards, but cost almost nothing additional when designed inclusively from the start. In a few cases, like for example, you see the platform lift, the new build scenario showed a reduced cost. Finally, I also wanted to share this table with you, not to go through all the numbers in details, but to just highlight a few interesting findings. This table shows the relative universal accessibility cost for each building element, representing the extra or reduced cost compared to the total construction cost. So when we zoom in, a few patterns stand out. Here, for example, the element circulation, we see a negative cost in the build scenario for schools and the small retail stores, showing how a well-considered design actually can reduce total costs compared to the current situation in the cases that we examined. The elevator and the indoor stairs and ramp elements had a strong impact on the overall average, both for larger and medium-scale buildings. In schools, most elevators already were accessible standards, met the accessibility standards, which explains the relative low cost there. But in town halls, one case really required an additional entire elevator and an elevator shaft, leading to much higher costs in the new build and in the renovation phase. So another notable trend is a relatively high renovation cost for the small retail stores, particularly for exterior joinery, exterior stairs, fixed furniture, because these are small buildings. Even modest interventions weigh heavily on the total cost. For example, none of the small shops had a wheelchair accessible counter, so this resulted in a high renovation cost for fixed furniture. But when designed correctly from the start in the new build scenario, this cost dropped considerably. So to wrap up the results of this research, when we compare the renovation and the new build scenarios for these 12 cases, clear patterns appear for this sample. Both scenarios come with a cost, but the new construction is consistently much cheaper, and this holds true across all building typologies and all building elements. And when looking at the 15 elements separately, the largest cost differences for our sample appear to be circulation and exterior stairs and ramps. These are very expensive to fix in renovation, so to retrofit, but they come with almost no additional cost when designed inclusively from the start. And some elements even gave a reduced cost. So these findings indicates that early integration of accessibility in the design process is cost effective, and in some cases it also saves money. So is it a lot of information in 15 minutes? I hope it's a bit clear. If you need or want more time or read more information about this research, I sent the presentation to Keiko so she can share with you. And on the last page, you find a link to our paper with more details on this research project, and also a link to our extensive report, which includes all the details on the cost, the benefits, but also about previous research, etc. But this one is in Dutch, so it might be you need more translation for that one. So and if you need more information, I'll be welcome to share this with you. So I'll stop sharing then, and then.
Thanks very much, Elke, for a very insightful presentation. I think it's going to be very useful, and we are going to even use AI to translate to understand the details.
Voila.
So I know you have to leave and you can stay with us just a couple of minutes. So I am going to make a pause here before passing to the panelists. And if anyone has specific questions for Elke, Keiko and Andres will remain here so we can make the questions related to their presentation later. But if there is any specific questions to Elke, please. Do we have anything on the chat?
No, Sandrine said the link doesn't work, but it looks like working for me. So if any other people who has accessibility should let me know.
Yeah, we will
We
check
can
and
also
update
download.
it
Yeah.
if there are any issues on the link. Yeah. Any questions in the room? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, okay. You are allowed to.
Thank you. Now you mentioned about some like a negative cost cases. What would you mean by negative cost? I mean, how did you conclude as a negative cost?
Well, of course, it's not a big sample, so it's only on these cases that I can give information about it. But we assessed all the existing buildings, and for example, some things were not there, and for example, one building had that platform lift, so we asked we tried to fix this and make everything on a same level and work it out with ramps. And in the end, our contractors showed that this cost would cost less if you would do it right away in that way with the ramps and with other things than with the platform lift, who was more expensive in this case. So there are some things that could help you and to not make expensive retrofittings afterwards when the building is in use. So, and then thinking about, oh, people can't get up and we have to change things. So these are some small things that our contractors who gave information on the costs at the market price, who said, yeah, okay, this would be much cheaper if you would do it right away in this way. So, so we saw some of those examples in this study. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Perfect.
Clear.
No, thank you very much. That's very clear. I'm sure after we dig in the report, we might have some more questions, so we will be reaching out. And
you're welcome really to reach out.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, on the topic of building regulations, we have been trying to find cost analysis on the different aspects that we are assessing, and there are not many assessments in that. So that's a topic we want to increasingly understand better. What are the opportunities, savings, and also the cost benefit impacts.
Yeah, our study is already 6 years old, so indeed it's not that recent anymore. So I suppose we need some more research on that area indeed. Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely, exactly. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time. So we will now welcome our panelists for the deeper conversation. We have a very distinguished panelists here today. We have Charlotte McLean, who is our Global Disability Advisor at the World Bank. She focusing on working and supporting operational teams across the institution to ensure bank policies, programs, and projects take people with disabilities into consideration. And we appreciate that she's connecting from Live, so she's making a really great effort to support us. So really thank you, Charlotte, for making the time to be with us today. We have
You're welcome.
Swati Jasdeva. It's, sorry, my pronunciation today is not working very well. She's an urban specialist working in inclusive cities and also with a lot of experience and operations. And she was leading some of the guidance notes related with the Paris alignment. So she has been also very engaged across the bank with several operational teams. And we have Mirta Liliana Escobar. She's a senior disaster risk management specialist. Oh, that one. My Spanish pronunciation is working well with GFDRR, and she supports operational teams in topics related with disability and gender. So they are going to share some of the experiences from the World Bank perspective. So let me start with Charlotte. We have been speaking about in the session on the needs and of advocacy of a wider user needs. How is the World Bank advocating for the large varieties of user needs to advance universal accessibility through World Bank engagements, and how task teams on the ground can enforce awareness through country engagements related with this topic? So over to you, Charlotte.
So thank you very much. And first of all, I want to congratulate Keiko and the team for this really important piece of work and a super interesting presentation from Elke's research, which I really want to dig into on the costing piece. So congratulations. Honestly, this is fantastic. And thanks for the question. But before I actually go into the kind of the content of the question, I did want to start off by saying that, you know, when you introduce a new approach, it's important that we socialize it, and advocating becomes essential. And that's really in part to get people to buy into the idea, and to raise awareness. So advocacy for disability inclusion, and more specifically for universal accessibility, was required, right? And even today, we still need to ensure that colleagues are understanding more about what it means, how you do it, and seeing the added value of universal access. However, I'll also be the first one to say that it is not sufficient in and of itself. So advocacy is not going to change everything. It has to be supported by technical assistance. We really need more on the how-to part of it, as well as having an enabling authorizing environment, both within the bank, but importantly within at country level. So policies, and most definitely building codes that provide these guardrails, are fundamental to enhancing systematic universal accessibility. I also wanted to point out that universal accessibility is constantly evolving, in part because we're seeing more economies applying this concept, but also because we're seeing many of these countries taking advantage of technology, and that's helping us advance and speed up the process around universal accessibility. I wanted to bring attention to a very recent European Union Accessibility Act, which requires accessibility to the built environment, but extends itself to goods and services. And within the EU Accessibility Act, there's a directive that aims to improve the functioning of the internal market. So there's an economic basis or argument for why we need to have accessible products and services. And the idea there is really to remove barriers. And this is something that obviously the member states have signed up to. Now, what's important about this is that the argumentation around getting this act through the Commission was very much around the business case. And the idea was that this would provide common rules of accessibility within the EU, lending to cost reduction. It would also address issues around easier cross-border trading, and that it would present more market opportunities if products and services were accessible. And I think that's really an important piece to keep in mind, that there is definitely an economic rationale for why we work towards universal accessibility. Now, this advancement in Europe has been significant because it extends beyond accessibility just for persons with disabilities, albeit that's a large population. But as mentioned by earlier speakers, we're seeing growing aging populations, and they too will benefit from universal accessibility. And so that really highlights this broader user needs approach. But I think the flip side of that is also as important. We're seeing in many low-income economies that they're beginning their journeys. And it was interesting to see the map that Keiko showed. And this journey is really seeking to uphold international norms and standards rooted within the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And they're looking for good examples. And so they're looking for guidance, they're looking for norm setting, and they're definitely looking for technical assistance. And so your work becomes really critical at a time like this. Then I would also like to mention a point I think that might have been raised by Andres, and that was that we need to ensure that we need to recognize that we're seeing an increase amongst stakeholders. And when I think about universal accessibility, I think of stakeholders such as organizations of persons with disabilities, obviously older persons and so forth. But what we're seeing right now is that there's been a lot more investment in skilling up these organizations. And they are looking out and are quite aware of what their rights are, what laws are in place, influencing laws where they don't exist, and demanding that application of universal access be in place. So I think that's an important piece for us to keep in mind. But maybe specifically to your question, within the bank, we've been advancing the accessibility agenda by way of a requirement under Environmental Social Framework Standard 4, ESF 4, and we have an indicator that requires you to apply the concept of universal accessibility. And what's important about that is that we're able to monitor that. We're also able to provide capacity building and technical assistance to help colleagues within the bank understand more precisely and more accurately what this means in practice. So again, the work that Keiko and the team have just concluded will be extremely useful in helping us really flesh this out. So we have this indicator, as I mentioned, and then what we did with the indicator was to embed the indicator into the IDA 20 policy commitment. So that has been instrumental because now that's attached to actual financing. So look, I think, we're on the right track, and there's definitely more that we can do. But yeah, I mean, I think those are some of the comments that I'd like to make related to that.
Wow, that was excellent. Thank you very much. And we look forward to continue the journey with you and on the implementation of these elements and on the discussion. So I want to pass now to Mirta to share some examples from the engagements with the countries. And in your experience, how do you ensure accessibility is embedded in building regulatory reforms, designs, rather than treated as an add-on element?
Thank you, Anna. Super interesting, the presentation. I think a really nice framing. And the way that this is a very difficult question to answer. So the way that I organize it is what we have seen in practice and the experiences that we have seen in the countries we work is that ultimately depends on the relationship between the regulation and the design and how they interact. So I have 3 examples to show the 3 different cases that we see. And one is in Romania, which is what Charlotte was mentioning. In Europe, there tends to be stronger regulations. So what we have seen is that in the project, in the DRM project, when they were doing the reconstruction, a fire station and some other facilities. It was an easy integration, and it was just the regulation was there, and they were able to integrate it into the building that they were including in the program. So, for example, this included integrated ramps, barrier-free circulation, accessibility in the restrooms. So this goes to show that when regulation is clear and enforced, it just becomes a technical requirement. It's easier to shape design automatically. Then you have the second example, which is the case of Honduras, where the design is driver the institutionalization. So what I mean by that is that this was a reconstruction project that was after hurricanes, and the project itself started doing consultations. Also, there was a cost-benefit analysis, and I'm sure it was not as rigorous as the one that was presented here, but the numbers came like very similar. It was 0.51% of increase if the universal accessibility measures were included. And what happened in this case is that the regulation was not very clearly enforced. So what they did was to focus on the design, and then they started doing this for the schools that were included in the project, but then they expanded. The Ministry of Education tried to use these standards and apply to other schools, and eventually they will become the norm. So here is an example of where design and innovation can influence institutional practice and hopefully in the future shape some of the regulation. And then the last case is in Bangladesh, where design is reinforcing regulation in cases where regulation is not consistently applied. So in this case, Bangladesh has a series of projects that have been focused on shelters. And what has been seen time after time is like the better the design becomes and the better it is incorporated, then the new projects pick on that, and then they keep implemented it in a way that applies it makes more clarity of what the regulations are meant to be applied. So that their case is basically demonstrating how the regulatory intent could be applied, and it can translate into concrete functional infrastructure, and then it becomes best practice. So then just to kind of wrap up and answer your question, I think that from the perspective of how do you ensure, I think it's just a combination. I think in the bank, we always need to be very careful of context. Context matter more than, in other circumstances, but in the bank, context matter. So from the three examples that I gave, is regulations really clearly is what make universal accessibility enforceable. The design improves that it's achievable, so it gives that little bit of additional information that would cost benefit, and then the institutional uptake, it shows that it can become a standard practice, that is good design, and that everybody benefits from it. And then I just want to mention one thing, that when they were doing the consultations in Honduras, one of the social specialists from the government, and she had a slide, but I couldn't find it, that she said inclusion pays once, and then exclusion costs forever. So she was trying to say that you can do it one night, but I couldn't find it, but I translated to English. I hope it makes much sense in Spanish. But yeah, so that's my answer. So just the how regulations and design interact, I think is very important in practice.
Thank you very much, Mirta. Very insightful example. So, Swati, over to you. You lead the Inclusive Cities initiative from the Global Urban Unit. Can you share some of the major activities related with universal accessibility in the urban environment, and how those things can benefit from your team on support and resources?
Thank you, Anna. And thank you to all the speakers. Great presentation. I think just to give an overview, we have a program called Mosaic, which is mainstreaming operational solutions and analytics in inclusive cities. This is the second iteration of Inclusive City. And this is universal accessibility, disability inclusion is one of the themes that we are looking at. And what we do is three things. One is check on the corporate commitments, which we have, especially on the post-DRM facilities, to be disability inclusive. We also regularly monitor the portfolio and look for some low-hanging fruits, especially on the UA side. And third is we are developing this global toolkit on universal accessibility. And so the toolkit is still in process. We have a draft now, and it will be launched or at least finalized by end of November and launched in January. But I think the key elements of the toolkit and where it started from was under the previous inclusive city, we did two pilots, one in Senegal and one in Yemen. And that was really looking at how to mainstream universal accessibility as part of the bank operational project. The Senegal was a DRM kind of a project, and Yemen being an FCV, a post-conflict context. We also had a quite successful project in Indonesia as part of the slum upgrading. And in that, for example, we looked at the narrow pathways within the project in the slums and how to initially engage the community, but also to come up with low cost solutions to accessibility within that can be incorporated as part of the slum upgrading. So from these three different pilots or studies that we did, we came up with engagement as well as operational guidance that were very context specific to these countries. And now we are working on the global toolkit, which has three main elements or three different toolkits within it. It's looking at engagement. So there's an engagement toolkit, then there's a design toolkit, and there's operation and maintenance toolkit. The idea is that, again, as said by a lot of speakers, that you need to engage quite early on. And if it is embedded as part of the project identification and project design, then it costs a lot less. There are less barriers and challenges. And starting with the challenges, not just on the awareness, which we know is also a constraint, but also cost, where there is a stigma that it is going to cost a lot more if we include UA, new versus retrofitting, but still it is a cost, and there are competing priorities of some of the cities where we work in. Codes don't exist, and so we when we started collecting this from even the stakeholders within the bank and external, this was flagged as one of the major barriers, right? And thanks for that research on cost benefit. I think it definitely shows that if you include it in the beginning, it makes a lot more difference. There's obviously also limited technical capacity at the client level. And so really engaging with the client during the project identification in the project cycle of the bank helps, whether also, looking at um, uh, the monitoring and O&M part of it. And so after the implementation, who is going to take care of the assets that are built, that are universally accessible, and to build that continuity within that. So the way the toolkit is organized, it is divided into 5 key infrastructure sectors. So we have urban sector, which is looking at public buildings and public spaces and things and other urban development interventions. We have DRM, which is looking at evacuation, emergency shelters, early warning systems, and things like that. And we have water and sanitation. We have transport, which is again looking at case studies from the bank on BRTs and other things, more on accessibility. And then we have digital development. So the way the toolkit right now is organized is by, as I said, the design, engage, and O&M. And within the engagement, you go through different checklist case studies, but also giving you some sort of a framework to look at how to identify stakeholders, how to engage with them, how to come up with a stakeholder engagement plan, and making sure that cost benefit becomes part of it in the early stages. In the design part, we go into the technical details of each of these infrastructure, but really also diving into the spatial typologies. Again, in the cities, we try to differentiate between the inner urban areas versus the urban fringe areas, waterfront areas, as well as steep type terrains, right, within the city, and how, because of these different spatial typologies, the technical designs will be different. We also go into the TORs, which is something we learned from the TTLs, that's the requirement of how to easily incorporate UA into their design and build contracts or TORs that they are writing for their projects. And then in the O&M, it's more asset identification and the implementation plan. It also includes guides, templates, and case studies. We had a lot of brainstorming sessions with Charlotte and other teams and the inclusion experts at the bank to also understand what is already done so that we're not overlapping or repeating. We have links to the different toolkits that are already there in the bank. There's Icarus toolkit that's developed by the LAC team, which is specific to the LAC region. And then there is other toolkits, right, that are attached. And we have tried to also come up with a digital way, a URL link that can work, which has all these resources. So again, not to have like a report format, but really to incorporate with our natural IT. So yeah, look forward to that toolkit that we are reviewing just now. But this is just a
Perfect. Thank you, Swati. We look forward to the launching of the toolkit. That sounds very useful for the different teams. While I have some other questions here, I think I prefer to open the floor for the people that is connected and the people that is in the room. You have a very good set of experts here, so you can make your questions and we can have a more engaging discussion. So open to you guys who wants to break the ice.
Question. Throughout the very interesting exchange that we already had, and also thanks to the panelists for the example, and I want to know more about the toolkit, by the way, Swati. But my main question was about how far those regulations are applicable in FCBs. We've been trying to do so in Niger, for example, and it was mostly on public space and tried to see, how we could rehabilitate some roads and make them, through the drainage system that we were putting, and how could we make the environment more accessible. So this is more a discussion with the municipality. It's less about buildings. It's somehow easier with buildings. We saw that in Senegal, in Saint Louis, because if we are making a program with new buildings, I mean, we can really apply our standards. And Mirta, I was very interested with your example. I think it was in Honduras, and we tried to do that in Haiti like many years ago, where our standards of construction, in that case, it was for school, we tried to see how they could be applied and then standardized for schools in general. But still, in really FCD context, do you think we can really apply those standards? And do you have some sort of, I would say, I don't want to say downgraded version of how we should apply them, but where we say that's the minimum we should have and that we could be applying in our FCD countries? Yeah, so maybe I can start and maybe others come in. Yes, I think SCV is a wonderful, like a place to test out because, there could be, reconstruction effort happening. So to inform the reconstruction effort, that would impact for the lifetime, right? Not only, one building, but lifetime. So I think that would be a fantastic opportunity. And then, in fact, I used to work for the UN organization in South Sudan. And at that time, we used the housing reconstruction opportunity to, integrate universal accessibility for, the elderly people. And I remember that after the Nepal earthquake, it's not FCB, but they also have like a political instability, right? But the country team really made effort to integrate the universal accessibility angle, and they developed the model of the house with the universal accessibility. So I think yes, maybe it could be easier to apply to a specific building type to begin with. That could be a kind of initial low-hanging fruits. And then maybe if it is more about the public spaces, maybe, the easiest approach is to agree with the local government. Whenever you invest, for example, paving of improving the of the road, you can include this angle into the TOR, for example. So, maybe we can help the government to have a standardized, paragraph to include in the TOR of the procurement so that it becomes the basis or standard for the government to integrate. So I think there could be few easy entry point, and depending on what could be the easiest, construction engagement that the bank is financing. But I think, yeah, definitely FCB is, and I think one FCB example we did was Comoros housing. Again, Comoros housing, we tried to integrate green universities. Yeah. So,
That's not a common project.
yeah.
Charlotte?
Yeah.
So I agree 100% with Keiko. And I just wanted to add that I think we don't want to downgrade the standards. If anything, we want to maintain the standards, because trying to go back and getting standards corrected, as mentioned by other colleagues, is costly. So we probably don't want to do that. But I do think in the context of FCV, we also have a strong argument in that often there are more people with disabilities as a result of the circumstances, right? And so the data there might even be, better for you to argue your case for why you need to be building in accessibility from the get-go. And I think it's really about maintaining these standards, obviously cognizant of the context, because you have to do that. And I think working with local organizations is also really helpful. They often have some low cost options, not lower standard, but low cost options to reach the same standard, right? And those can be applied in the context of FCV. And I know that we've done some interesting work in post-conflict in Burundi, around ex-combatants, and the bank supported the building of homes for them. All of those homes were built in an accessible fashion. And what that does, it begins to normalize this notion of accessibility, right? Which I think is also really important in the context in which we work.
Something to that. I think I completely agree with Charlotte. There's disproportionately high proportion of disabled in displaced population or in post-conflict context, right? But I think one thing also to add is the limited capacity or institutional capacity issues in these FCB contexts, right? And so I think capacity building needs to be part of whatever we do, not to lower the standards, but I think recognizing that the fragile institutions are already there, and the local municipalities have competing priorities, and this might be not on their list, but to ensure low cost solutions that can be added from the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, well, yes, I was going to add that also capacity building is important, because most of guidelines, accessibility regulation that we find for free online cover basic aspects of public roads, the urban environment, which are sidewalks, curb ramps, and all that stuff is easily available. So you don't need to really develop nothing new. You can just apply what is there, but the people there needs to know where to look at and the basic criteria of how to incorporate that. Yeah, it's again, you do not need to downgrade, only increase the knowledge of the practitioners, the officers, whatever.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Progressive approach, I don't know.
Yeah.
Adding to the complexity and the sophistication. But Charlotte, you raised your hand again? No, it's your all hand. Okay. Any other questions in the room or in the people connected?
I don't see any online questions.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I think has been a very enriching discussion. We have identified a lot of options, opportunities, and tools, but also how to connect and also coordinate the work we are doing across the World Bank. And some of the things that I take from this also is how we connect with the safeguards teams that have the opportunity, and how we connect to monitoring what we are doing. So in that sense, we try to have a larger impact on the different activities that we're implementing. So looking forward to continue that discussion, and over to Niels for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks to our presenters and thanks to our panelists. Maybe just to say that we will, from our global unit point of view, I think it's we have in many ways really a privileged position. We have an opportunity to observe challenges that occur again and again in the World Bank's operational engagements, observe the opportunities that occur again and again, learn and plug in information and technical assistance to help our frontline task teams address the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities. And on inclusion and disability, we have already developed quite a number of tools, knowledge, partnerships, methods, approaches, and I believe we will continue to do that. But more important than developing the knowledge is enabling that knowledge is applied by the World Bankers in the front line, working directly with the municipalities or the countries, the counterparts that have the capacity they have, and where it's important that we as development professionals can enable them to do something in a better way than they otherwise would be doing. And I certainly am committed for our unit to continue to enable that, both with the funding we can offer through the trust fund and with the knowledge that we can facilitate through our people at a global level. But thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in, sticking with us, and for participating. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening wherever you are.